Good morning. Today we're going to talk about India-UK Defence Cooperation. If you understand, we have a very traditional historic relation. UK has also helped India in Hawk and also helping India building advanced Hawk jet program. Plus there has been a multiple talks of helping India in the engine manufacturing and multiple other areas. HAL, our own homegrown defense OEM, is tying up with the leading company of UK, BAE, to develop multiple systems, hardware for our armed forces. To talk about the Indo-UK Defence Partnership, we have with us Brigadier Gavin Thompson. Brigadier Gavin Thompson is a decorated armed force soldier. He has been awarded, for his service in Iraq War in 2009, and he's in India to talk about India-UK Defence Cooperation. Sir, my first question would be, there has been a report in the Parliament which talks about building bridges, reawakening UK-India ties. It says there is a gap, between India and UK ties, and UK policymakers have not tuned in or aligned themselves to fill that gap. How do you see that gap in the defence cooperation between India and UK?
It's well known, and it's a reality, that the geostrategic situation in the Indo-Pacific now is very different to what it was 50 years ago. Economic power and political power are moving back east, and at the time at which the UK decided that it would go west of Suez, that wasn't the case. But now that it's changing, the UK is changing its perspective too. Yes. The gap that you talk about is not a widening gap. The gap is there, but it's a closing gap now, is the way I think we'd like to describe it. And after our 2010 Strategic Defence and Security Review, the UK decided it was going to come back east of Suez again, in full recognition of this changing geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific region. So now the UK recognises the Indo-Pacific as a concept. It has, since 2010, been investing heavily in those equipment capabilities that will make it a much more prominent player in this region. Since 2010, the UK has gone through the largest modernisation programme of the Royal Navy in living memory. Yes. We've been through the Type 45 destroyer programme. We're now into the Type 26 Global Combat Ship programme, and it will culminate, of course, with our Queen Elizabeth class of aircraft carrier, yes, the 65,000-tonne full electric propulsion aircraft carrier that we've already committed to coming into the Indo-Pacific on its maiden voyage. So let's not deny that geostrategic realities of 50 years ago took the UK in a different direction, but now that is changing, and as we come back east of Suez and re-engage with this region, what we find is that we've still got a huge permanent presence here. So from the east in Brunei and Singapore, where we have permanent bases, to the north in Nepal, where we have permanent bases, to the west of the Indo-Pacific region in Kenya, where we have bases, and in the south, the British Indian Ocean territories, where we have bases. So we're coming back into this region, but finding that we still have a significant permanent presence here, which makes the UK a relevant player, yes, in the Indian Ocean region. So the gap, yes, but not a widening gap, it's a closing gap. And I think you'll see over the coming years, certainly in defence, a real ambition to close that gap further and close it quickly.
Yes. So we'll come back to the Indian Ocean, later, but I want to understand, a broad perspective, as far as the Indo-UK defence ties are concerned. What are the new elements of India-UK defence ties besides our advanced Hawk jet program?
Yeah.
Could you talk about some of the
sure
elements of Indo-UK cooperation?
Well, let's start with the foundation. The foundation comes from the Defence and International Security Partnership of 2015. Signed and agreed between Mr. Modi and our Prime Minister, and that was reconfirmed in 2018 with the joint prime ministerial statements around about the time of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Those things, we made commitments to work on the Make in India programme. We made commitments to both of our positions on countering terrorism. We made commitments on cyber, and we've made commitments to be partners with shared interest in building security in this region. So that's the foundation block. As a result of that, we have a series of meetings that happen biannually between the two countries. I won't go into the names of them, but there's a significant amount that cover everything from Army, Navy, Air Force to cyber, to medical, to equipment, and into even now an ambition to talk frequently about defence reform. The UK has been through a very significant transformation and modernisation programme in defence, and those lessons that we've learned about moving into jointery over the last 20 years are lessons that we're keen to share with India as India starts its journey or continues its journey into the joint space. So that's the foundation upon which we're building, and that's quite a significant foundation. As a result of that, we're already working on logistic MOUs, training MOUs, and we're hoping to get those signed in the very, very near future. This year, we signed an equipment MOU with India, which enabled us to start more collaborative government-to-government work on defence capabilities, which has been a real coup. And already, even though it's only been signed for a matter of months, we're developing 3 very good technology programs with India under that MOU. They're not the
Could you
details
talk about this specific program under the MOU?
I can, well, let me talk about one in particular, okay? So it's widely known that Rolls-Royce and GTRE have been working on a core engine technology demonstrator. That, for some time, couldn't proceed, but now that we have the equipment MOU, and both governments have some surety through the government-to-government relationship, we're hoping and confident that that program will move forwards, and that dialogue is moving much more quickly than it was in the past. So already we're moving in that area, and we have other programs under the MOU that are moving again, still under discussion, but more on combat air and cyber, and some very interesting collaborations in place with India. So we have the equipment MOU. We are aspiring to get our logistics and training MOUs signed as well. One of the things I'm keen to do is set up an annual maritime dialogue between India and India. That's missing in our dialogue. We have Navy to Navy talks, and they concentrate on training and lower level naval opportunities. But what we need to talk about really is lift that level up and have a maritime and talk about oceanic strategies together so that the UK and India can do that. And we have an agreement with VIF in India and IISS, an Institute of Strategic Studies in the UK this year in October to have the inaugural maritime conference. So there's that's definitely an area in which we're moving forward. If I come to just the very recent past, only 2 weeks ago we held an industry dialogue between UK industry and the Indian Army, because we're very keen again to understand the Indian Army modernisation programme, and that dialogue was a very successful dialogue with several UK companies in India talking directly to the Indian Army over how UK industry could help India solve its challenges and problems in army modernisation. So as you can see, we've got a broad range, a very broad base, stable base upon which we're building, and now we're taking things forward very quickly with some very interesting capability collaborative programs. And on top of all of that, as you know, we have 2 very significant programs. We have the aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth class. And it's been reported that the UK is in consultation with the Indian government over that. You have a requirement. Your Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Singh, recently said that you had a requirement for a 65,000 tonne full electric propulsion aircraft carrier.
That's right, that's right.
There's only one country in the world that has a 65,000 ton full electric propulsion aircraft carrier right now, and that is the UK. We've de-risked the program, and it would seem odd if we weren't talking very closely about UK-India collaboration on aircraft carriers. And that's got sanction at Prime Ministerial level.
Yes. Brigadier Gavin Thompson, will come back to that Queen Elizabeth in detail, because that is a futuristic one which India and UK is looking for. But coming back to this engine manufacturing, I understand in 2017, your Secretary of Defence, very categorically remarked that UK will help India, in building, engine, with Rolls-Royce, and BAE also be part of the consortium. And it will also help India in building advanced medium combat aircraft program, which we call AMCA, but did not take off. Why it did not take off,
In 2018, the UK launched its Future Combat Air Strategy, which is only 1 year after the comments you're talking about. The UK now has a clear path forward to the decisions that it needs to take in the middle of the next decade on how the UK will develop its Future Combat Air Programme. That programme has been made available to many countries in the world, and we're in discussion with India about how India can also, with shared objectives, be part of that programme. It was launched, or the news that programme had come together between UK and Sweden was launched at the Royal International Air Tattoo last month in the UK. But that programme, that's not a non-exclusive memorandum of understanding, and that's a programme that we'd be delighted if India wanted to have further discussions on how we can develop future combat air capabilities. It's a discussion that is going on, and it's one.
So
that
still
UK,
on
it's still on. It's still on.
Okay.
There's nothing to announce yet,
Okay.
but it's a discussion that's on, and it's healthy, and it's one that in the next couple of months I do hope we'll have another further high-level dialogue on between the UK and India. We have shared needs for particular subsystems. We both need to develop future combat air engines. We're both interested in stealth technology. We're both interested in sensor and weapons platforms.
Yes.
And we're both looking at similar timelines for the introduction of those new subsystems on perhaps to the LCA Mark II program.
So coming back to the same engine program, so was it stuck because of the cost or the technology transfer? Is there any of these elements involved?
I think it wasn't. I don't think it's a cost issue, and I think right now where we are is we're talking about a technology program, and of course this is an area in which there are sensitive technologies. But now that we have the government-to-government agreement, some of those sensitivities can be handled between governments rather than at the commercial level, and I think both countries are much more content with that approach.
So if we have, of course, our own homegrown Tejas, which is powered by the GE engine so far, but since Indian Air Force in the process of buying in bulk, and apart from our AMCA program, so if you think with Indian government, if managed to collaborate, with the UK government, how long be you able to achieve the engine, which could be fit and utilized for these two futuristic program of Indian government?
At this stage, I think what we're talking about is we're at a stage where both governments are comfortable developing and understanding the technologies rather than producing an aircraft per se, but the technologies that will support future combat air systems. And we share very similar requirements in that area, which is why it's a healthy place for us to collaborate right now. The timelines are open-ended, but I think the UK is aiming for decisions in about the 2025 timeframe, which would be a similar timeframe that India would need to be looking at its program, because a 2025 decision is going to produce an aircraft in about the 2040 timeframe. And that's the sort of timeframe I think for LCA Mark II, India will be looking at as well. So we've got very similar timelines, we've got very similar requirements, we've got very similar subsystem technological challenges to get over, and provided we can find those points of common interest, I think there's a really healthy environment for the UK and Indian governments to collaborate on future combat air programs.
You understand of the estimate, our armed forces, require some about more than 400, aircraft, fighter aircraft, to see the two-front, theory, and then beyond that, perhaps having looked at the numbers, basically it would be very appropriate, to look for a partner who could also, infuse about the sixth generation or next generation aircraft, and thereby, when UK government, offer Tempest, it created a lot of euphoria. Okay, this is the new development, a futuristic program which India could achieve advanced capability.
Yeah.
How realistic is the Tempest? How far we have gone beyond the paperwork? And could you talk about,
So Tempest, just to first dispel a myth about Tempest. Tempest isn't a particular aircraft that looks a particular way. What Tempest is right now, it's a collaboration of companies who've all agreed to come together with the UK government and develop the future combat air subsystems and systems of the future. How realistic is it? Well, the UK government has put £1.9 billion into that programme. And it has a realistic decision point in 2025 about how it's going to develop its next generation of aircraft.
The budget has been approved for that?
The budget for the early stages is 1.9 billion. That's a significant. Nobody else in Europe is investing that much money in future combat air programs. We're the most significant investor. We're already got a memorandum of understanding with the Swedes. They've put a lot of money into developing Gripen as an aircraft, and the UK is now investing significant sums as well. That program, as I say, is not exclusive to UK and Sweden. It's a program that we would delight if other partners joined. And clearly, as you quite rightly point out, with India's huge demand for aircraft in the future, it would make absolute sense if that was a Make in India program. And for it to be a Make in India program off the back of Tejas, perhaps, then you need the subsystem technology, not the purchase of a ready-built aircraft from somebody else. That's the Tempest concept.
So the very concept of Tempest has been tangibly defined in terms of the avionics, in terms of the weapon, in terms of the stealth, and how it's going to work. And second, what is the response of Indian government to the offer so far?
It's engineering led. It's fair to say Tempest right now. It's not defined. What we want to do right now is let those bright brains in the UK in the combat air sector, which is a very advanced sector in the UK, to come up with the technological envelope in which we can operate and make the decisions. We haven't defined a particular scope. We just want the engineering challenge to be met in order that in the next decade we can make a decision on what the exact scope of the aircraft would be within the realms of technological feasibility. But for now, we want industry to come up with the technology that will give us the options in the future. So far, the Indian government has been very receptive. They're very keen to be briefed on it. We had a briefing to elements of the Indian government at Aero India last year, and I'm very keen that we continue that dialogue this year, and hopefully in October or November we'll have a second range of discussions on how India might like to be part of that program. At the same time, we've got things like the Rolls-Royce GTRE tie-up and other MOUs that we're developing through the equipment MOU on technology demonstrations that could ultimately fall into the Tempest future combat air strategy discussions. So we're not waiting for a big announcement between the UK and India to get on with the science, to get on with the technology, to get on with the research. We're doing that now every day with India. But of course, it would be much better if we could get to the position where we had an MOU with the Indians too on future combat programs, like we do with the Swedes.
Brigadier, you mentioned, initially in your conversation about the maritime, your focus on the maritime and Indian Ocean, and of course UK has a direct linkages, to Indian Ocean, and for us it's a strategic part, for the sense that India needs to maintain the rules and order in the maritime. Now there has been a there has been particular effort called Quad, which looks into this maritime security. You see, you have partners like United States, Japan and Australia coming together. Having said that, UK is our traditional partner, of course, and we have direct linkages. Why not UK is part of Quad, and if not Quad, then how do you align to the Indian Ocean in context to India?
You're right, we're slightly outside the Quad right now, but that's not a reflection of UK ambition. We would like to be much closer on the Quad, and we'll continue dialogue in that area so that perhaps in the future we can be much more closely aligned to the Quad. But the Quad's quite an eye-catching concept, but underneath it, you talk about maritime cooperation in the region. The UK is a member of the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, IONS. We're a partner of IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association. That's going on every day. We have a white shipping agreement between the UK and India. Let me just give you a typical 24-hour example. 70 ships in a 24-hour period, Indian ships, will be benefiting from that white shipping agreement between the UK and India. Every day the UK is operating in the Indian Ocean region with capabilities that are helping to defeat terrorism. Every day we've got counter-piracy operations in the Indian Ocean region. Every day we've got counter-narcotics, and every day we've got counter-people trafficking operations going on in this region. We've made a commitment to have permanently naval presence in the region. There'll always be a ship operating in this region now. We've just built a new base in Bahrain, and we have our logistics base in Duckham as well. So the Quad is a place where the UK has ambition, but if we're not distracted by the big highlight issue, and you look more deeply at what's going on a day-to-day basis, the UK is fully integrated in the Indian Ocean region in a way that complements perfectly the fact that both of our countries share an ambition for this region to be a free, open and peaceful area.
How concerned are you in the South China Sea when the rules are frequently broken, by China, and the universal rules and code of conduct which apply in the maritime domain? How concerned are you?
The UK is a maritime nation. It's relied throughout its history on free, open access to the ocean, and that is reflected now in the fact that the UK is a significant advocate in the UN Security Council for the rules-based international order. Anything that challenges the rules-based international order is therefore not in line with the United Kingdom's ambition for this region.
Coming back to the UK offer to Queen Elizabeth, 65,000 tonne, which could be the game changer, as we see, which could add a huge capability for India in their carrier program too. But there seems to be some confusion about the propulsion system. Is it a electric or is it a nuclear? How are you proposing in this segment basically? How is unfolding? Could you talk about
So well, I can tell you the UK's solution is a full integrated electric propulsion system. That type of system is a system that the UK has been developing throughout Type 45, our destroyer program that's now in service, and will be continued to be developed through Type 26, and its largest manifestation is in the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier, where we have a very sophisticated, working, de-risked, the most advanced developed full electric propulsion system in the world. The UK decided that it didn't want to have nuclear aircraft carriers. We believe the full electric propulsion system is the best one for us. And inside our 65,000 tonne carrier, we are achieving out of that system speeds in excess of that which Queen Elizabeth was asked to achieve at the design phase. So the power that we're getting out of those engines is giving us much more capability than we imagined, and UK industry believes that there is more stretch potential in that engine to go even further in the future.
Coming back to the one larger question about our armed forces, of course we have a, we came off from the British Army, days, and came off so far. There's always talk of, this equation between the budget, the right budget, for the armed forces, especially for the army, and the number of army soldiers we have. You also have gone through some of the hard restructuring, and here the debate is also on about, the number of, out of the budget, the revenue goes to the, lot of, the salaries part, the pension part. How do you look at how Indian armed forces could be more smarter, especially army, based on your experience and when you look at that?
In NATO, there's a well-known target which is spending 2% of gross domestic product on the armed forces, and the UK is one of the only countries in NATO, alongside the US, that achieves that 2% target in NATO. But there's a second criteria that nobody ever really talks about, and it is that of that 2%, 20% of the money must be spent on capital investment. The UK, apart from the US, is the only other partner in NATO that achieves 2% and 20%. Many other countries that achieve the 2% target do so, but are spending a lot of their money on manpower and not on capital investment. And the UK doesn't believe that that's the way to remain as a cutting edge, globally significant armed forces of the future. The UK believes in investment. Now, we have been through a modernising defence programme, and one of the key facets of that modernising defence programme is how we hold to those two criteria. Manpower inflation is a serious problem for all armies. People are living longer, pensions are being paid for longer, and therefore manpower inflation is a much more significant problem now than it was years ago. That's, I mentioned before that we are establishing a working group on defence reform between the UK and India, and that's exactly the sort of forum in which we'll be able to talk about how the UK has achieved its objective, the measures it's taken in the manpower space, the balance it's struck between manpower and technology as the right balance for the future needs of the armed forces, and how we've managed to get the costs of manpower down, and while still protecting the capital investment budget. And we'd be very happy, very, very happy, and we will be having those conversations with India, because we've got an appetite between the two countries to have a working group to discuss those things.
That's right, that's right. Brigadier, the last question, which is of course again the broad in parameters, you see the geopolitical change is so fast, and the conflict, the nature of conflict is also changing so fast, every day. You come from a very traditional, army background with the big tanks, over you, and now we have the artificial intelligence, drones, you have robotics, which say going to change the course of the war. How do you see the future wars should be fought?
Well, let's just...
Or these traditional equipments would be of any use in future? Say, for example, tanks.
Let's just go back to the turn of the 20th century. Yeah, we opened up the air domain. In the turn of the 20th century, the beginnings of World War I, towards the end of it, but most importantly, in World War II, the air domain was a new domain, and it was a domain which was contested and played a significant, decisive factor in the outcome of World War II, for example. Absolutely, the fact that Hitler could not in the Battle of Britain, defeat the RAF meant that he wasn't in a position to invade the UK, and the UK was able to stay in the game long enough so that the Americans joined the war. But the fact that we opened up the air domain as air transport and the technological ability to travel in the air came up meant that it was a significant part of the future of the war that came. Yeah, we're opening up cyber domain now, and we're opening up the space domain. The history of mankind tells us that those will be contested spaces in the future.
Yes.
And if the history of the Second World War is anything to go by, the lesson, they will be decisive domains in a future conflict on a regional or on a global scale. Now, we all hope that won't happen, but we've all of us in the armed forces are there as national insurance policies, and it's therefore our responsibility to make sure we're prepared to fight in whichever domain we think is going to be decisive in the future. But again, using the Second World War as an example, just because the air domain had been opened up and was contested, it didn't mean that there was less contestation in the maritime domain or less contestation in the land domain. So the very fact that we open up new domains does not necessarily follow that the older domains will become less relevant. And I think that's the lesson of history that I like to take. It means we need to be credible and we need to be at the cutting edge of the new domains, cyber and space, but it doesn't mean that we have to pay any less attention to those traditional domains.
So you think the tanks would be the force to reckon in the battlefield of the future war, right?
I think I'd be foolish to make any predictions of the future on exactly how wars would be fought, but there are still thousands and thousands of tanks in the world. Nobody knows exactly where that threat's going to come from, and therefore we have to have a balanced force structure, futuristic, without being so blind to the past that we think we can forget everything that went before.
Thank you, Mr. David Thompson. It has been great. We see a new era unfolding in India-UK Defence Cooperation, which will uphold the security not across the maritime domain, but across places where it requires rules, laws and regulation universally.